Josh and Congressman Perry, I am so sorry that you're going to have to follow that because it's going to be a letdown. I hate to say that. You guys are great, really awesome. Congressman Perry's going to have to lift his game. That's awesome. In 2018, the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court ruled that the state needed to revisit its redistricting plan from the 2010 census. The result was a splitting of York County for the first time into 2 congressional districts. Prior to this court ruling, all of York County was part of the 4th congressional district, but now the southern part of York County falls into the 11th district, represented by Congressman Lloyd Smucker from York County. The northern half of York County falls in the 10th congressional district, and it's represented by our speaker, Congressman Scott Perry, whose district also includes all of Dauphin and parts of Cumberland counties. Scott is now in his 4th term as congressman, having first been elected in the fall of 2012. Scott represents more than 750,000 people and basically saw his district shift north to include the cities of York and now Harrisburg as well, giving the district a little more urban makeup along with the rolling farmlands and suburban households that have traditionally been part of the seat. Scott is a combat veteran serving with the Pennsylvania National Guard for 40 years. This past March, having served in his final military position as Assistant Adjutant General, Perry impressively retired at the rank of Brigadier General. Prior to being elected to Congress, Scott served 3 terms in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. He has a bachelor's degree from Penn State University in Business Management and a master's of Strategic Studies with the U.S. Army War College. Scott resides in northern York County with his wife, Christy, and their 2 lovely daughters. Scott will be giving a legislative update from Washington, D.C., and will include views about the impeachment and the trial, which began yesterday in the Senate, our ongoing issues with Iran, trade deals with Mexico, Canada, and, of course, China, and the continuing resolution passed at the end of December. That is certainly a lot going on in D.C. Congressman Perry's committees include Transportation, Infrastructure, and Foreign Affairs. Rotarians and guests, please warmly welcome one of our congressmen, Scott Perry.
Wow, thank you so much. I got to tell you, I was here early, so I got to hear that twice, and it's just absolutely heavenly. So from a person that has 0 talent, God bless you. It was just absolutely wonderful. Thank you for what you do. Just a couple acknowledgments. My wife Christy and our 2 girls send their regards, and of course as York Countyans, they too are heartbroken daily by the split of our district. We didn't choose it, but we do the best we can. We're happy to have Lloyd as well, but I just think that it was better served with York County all in 1 congressional seat. That as well, my Chief of Staff, Lauren, sends her regards, and if you don't know, our District Director, Jay Ostrich, is here as a guest, and I just want to make you familiar with him. When I'm not here, which we're in D.C. a lot, Jay is generally the face of everything. He has to figure out why I'm voting on, what I'm voting on, and why I did it, and so on and so forth, and explain that to you on many occasions. It is my high honor to be here at the York Rotary, and again, I just want to also acknowledge and thank you for what Rotary does worldwide and what you do here in our community. It is just fabulous, fabulous work. So I'll give you a little bit of an update, and then I want to take some questions. I suspect you know, because you're watching, what's happening in Washington, D.C. with impeachment. Just to let you know, it's been not that hopefully this is a standard thing, but there is a standard based on precedent. In the past, impeachment in the House is the purview of the Judiciary Committee. But on this occasion, for whatever reason, politics, I'm not sure, the majority chose 3 committees of jurisdiction initially. And one of those was Foreign Affairs. And so the initial meetings in the SCIF, and if you don't know what that's, Secure Compartmentalized Information Facility. And so we just say SCIF, right? But for those of us, especially military, like Jay and myself, who have spent a lot of time in the SCIF, that's where you go to receive, discuss, disseminate classified information. And so the initial hearings were all held in the SCIF. And as a member of Foreign Affairs, I was on one of the committees, as a committee of jurisdiction. I attended all those meetings in the SCIF. Now, as it moved out of that into the public setting, it was in the purview of the Intelligence Committee. I do not sit on that, so I watched from from the seat, so to speak, with the rest of the audience and probably including yourself. And then it did move to judiciary, where they drafted the articles of impeachment. So that is the process, or that's the process that's currently being undertaken. And so the House essentially indicts. If you wonder what does impeachment mean and how is it germane to maybe your life here in York County or anywhere else in regard to the law, it's essentially an indictment. It's an accusation. So they listen to and do investigation, listen to witnesses, and they say, we think, somebody thinks that you've committed a crime. In this case, the crimes that are alleged are obstruction of Congress and abuse of power. Now, the differentiation from past impeachments to this one, in the past, and if you go way back, really interesting, but in the past there were actual crimes on the crime code that were committed that garnered the impeachment moniker in the proceedings. In this case, the abuse of power isn't a crime in the crime code. And obstruction of Congress isn't in the crime code. Actually, you could probably say that every president tries to obstruct Congress, right? I mean, we have these competing branches, and so this makes that very, very different in a way. And I will tell you, as a person, each one of us, no matter what your political stripe is, we all put our hand on the book and we raise our right hand and swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. And if you read the article, it says that the president will be impeached for bribery, treason, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And so what makes this very unique is it's not in the criminal code anywhere. As a matter of fact, I heard somebody say abuse of power. This is Washington, D.C., my goodness. The abuse of power happens every single day. But that's the process. So the House is indicted, and then, of course, according to the Constitution, the Senate tries. And each one of those senators acts as a juror. Now, it's not necessarily a trial like you would see right here in a York County courthouse. The senators act as jurors, but they're very limited in what they can comment on when the presentments are made. They get generally probably something like a 5-minute opportunity to make a statement or ask questions or have questions heard. So what they're going through right now in the Senate is they're talking about the rules that they will use to conduct the impeachment trial. Now, I will tell you this, from my perspective, and I listened to the whole thing, I tried to keep as complete and open mind about it at all, but the context is important as well. Understand that as a lifelong person who has revered the FBI, the CIA, the intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies, I have watched and been very concerned about things like the FISA court, which have been, I think it's very hard to argue at this point, haven't been used to garner federal power against a political opponent. And so in that context, I've listened to the witnesses and the testimony and had an opportunity to ask questions. I would say if I were having to judge what amount of information was actually factual, based on fact, firsthand knowledge that would be used against you for a parking ticket or anything else right here in your own community, I would say probably upwards of 90% of it was unfactual and had absolutely almost no relevance to the case. But this is our process. It's a political process as much as it's a legal process. The bigger news probably that you need to know, and this is big news, it's probably the second most important thing that Congress will do, other than declaring war and sending service members to fight on behalf of their country, is this impeachment. The other issue is what is being left behind as we focus on this. And I just want to let you know, if it looks like that nothing's happening in Washington, D.C. because we're completely and wholly focused on impeachment, that look is reality. It really is. I mean, we are still passing some legislation, but all the focus has been on this. And we're going to talk about a couple other things before I take some questions about the opportunities that are lost. I want to move quickly to Iran, and especially the killing of Soleimani. And I don't know what news you listen to, so we try and take it in from all sides because unfortunately our world today, you have to kind of multi-source your information. It's just the way things are. But this is the killing, and some people have called it an assassination. I don't call it that at all. It is the removal of the battlefield of a known terrorist responsible for at least probably 600 deaths of your service members and an untold number of maimings of your service members by a thing that when I served and Jay served in Iraq, a thing called an explosive form penetrator. And the vehicles that are built right down the street here had to be modified right? To deal with this explosive foreign penetrator. The Iranians figured out, and they were in the business of killing Americans during this war, that their IEDs weren't being effective to our mine-resistant vehicles. And so this guy devised this thing called an EFP that goes right through armor. And so we have members of Congress, members of your own community that walk around daily who have been horribly transformed in their lives because of the actions of this person. And that has nothing to do and nothing to say with all the other things he's done around the world, including his operations with Hezbollah, the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Iran is a terrorist nation. They use terrorism as statecraft. It's very different than another nation that we might have disagreements with. And so I would say this, while you might be concerned that he was taken off the battlefield and what was the president's, and people are going to argue about that, what was the president's rationale, what was his legal authority to do that? I think that whether you agree with the 2002 authorization of the use of military force, it does authorize him to do that. This is a combatant who was sanctioned by the UN not to travel. He was on the battlefield in Iraq where we have troops, where we have another authorization of the use of military force to conduct operations. He's in a uniform, albeit the uniform of Iran. A terrorist is a terrorist, I don't care what he wears. And the list goes on and on. And I just want to remind everybody, if you didn't know this, during the last administration, upwards of 4,000, think that's a staggering number, 4,000 individuals were killed around the globe by the United States via drone strikes, and nothing was said in Congress. And let me be on the side of not saying anything. When we're killing terrorists, that's a good thing for our country and the world. And so that's the right thing to do. And so I'm concerned about some of the opinions regarding our country and Iran. Iran's a terrorist state that we've been trying to manage for over 40 years now, since 1979. And by the way, Soleimani was present in 1979 when our hostages were taken. He was there. He was there in Beirut when our Marine Corps barracks was bombed. This is the face of this terrorist. And from my standpoint, and for guys like Jay and anybody else who has served, imagine you're sent to the battlefield. You've raised your right hand and you said, I will serve, to go fight an enemy. And your government says, there are two enemies on the battlefield that are trying to kill you. You can fight this one, but you can't touch that one. That's effectively what's happened for 40 years. It's unacceptable, and it, quite honestly, in my opinion, it is about time. We cannot have a terrorist nation that uses terrorism as statecraft have a nuclear weapon that is deliverable. And that's where Iran is headed. And the president has given them ample warning. They attacked our embassy, which is an act of war, if you think about that. Ample warning. And he told them, one American life is lost, and that's going to be the red line any minute. And he took action, and I agree with the action. But we should have a continuing discussion about the presidential powers, and I'm part of that, and I have been part of that even during the last administration, about reigning in presidential power and taking us to war. Our country, if we go to war, should go to war. Not just our military. That's my opinion, but our country should go to war. And we've been sending our military, and I think that gets some of the things that we have with this mission creep, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, or what have you. China. I just hate to tell you this, but you've been lied to for about 40 years about who China is and what their plans are for the United States. They plan to be the dominant country on the planet, and they have a target on America, and they had a target on America for a very, very long time. What is happening right now with tariffs and the economic situation is painful, especially painful to a community like this that does a lot of trade overseas, and particularly with China. However, if we don't get after it at some point, when we have an economy that's growing at about 3.5%, I don't know when we're going to do it. China has to be brought to the table to behave themselves and to be reasonable actors with the rest of the world. Now, the president signed the deal, and I think it's a good first step, but I will tell you this. Don't plan on China abiding by their terms of the deal. I would just tell you that, and I would ask you to look for that. If you're looking to do some reading on this, quick read, Michael Pillsbury, who was an advocate for 40 years of our policy with China, that China was going to normalize, become a democratic nation, and so on and so forth, has now turned the corner on that. Also, Bill Gertz is a regular writer in the Washington Times. I would encourage you to take a look at a couple of their books if you're at all skeptical. I'm happy to talk to you about it. Now, let's talk about some missed opportunities, whether it's impeachment or just the environment that we're in. We are not doing things that are really, really important to us. So we talked about our soldiers on the battlefield. I was just, some of these soldiers come back with this PTSD. It's not exclusive to our service members, but it's a particular issue in the population of service members. About 20 service members a day commit suicide. They bring the war home with them. Alcoholism, divorces, broken families, lost jobs, so on and so forth. We introduced a bill to allow a treatment that has been around since the 1920s. SGB, stellate ganglion block. It's an injection that actually works, but most of our VAs by far don't offer it. We would like to make sure that that is available to our service members to help them deal with PTSD. But other things that are important to you, just even important to Dr. Gunter Smith. I mean, infrastructure. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, I'm happy to be on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. I fought to be on it. We all need things in our community. I just drove through Mount Rose again. It's the project that never ends, right? And I talked to your appropriations chair here in the state, Representative Saylor, one of my former colleagues, a great guy, about a solution to that. But if we don't run a transportation bill, it's not going to happen. I can't force the majority to do it. If you're sitting on one of the highways, whether it's 83, 81, 15, 322, and wondering where's the more capacity, right? Where's more capacity? Those are things that habitually we've been able to, and we've been able to work through, find some agreement on. We've got a president that is willing to do it. I understand my colleagues, and I tell them, look, I get that you don't like the president. I get that you don't agree with him. That's your business, and that's fine. But we have to do things for our country here. We have cybersecurity issues. The good doctor wants to set up a program. He's got some construction down there. It's kind of maybe potentially held up a little bit of waiting on what we do with the Codorus Creek and the Corps of Engineers. That's infrastructure. That affects your life every single day right here in your county, your opportunities. Mike Summers talked to you about redistricting. Pennsylvania will probably lose another seat in the House of Representatives in this census that's being taken right now. Our young people, they get a great education, but we don't have the opportunity here in Pennsylvania compared to other states. We have to compete as a Commonwealth. We have to compete with other states, and that happens at the federal level, that happens at the state level, and to me it's a tragedy. We all want our children to, I have two little babies. Well, they were babies, they're 8 and 10, but I live in a house with 3 women, so I'm oftentimes out at the bar. But you don't want your children to go away to have opportunities. We have a fabulous, fabulous Commonwealth with a lot of resources. These are some of the things that concern me. The fact that I got to tell you, I'm a student of history, that socialism is a real conversation, a real topic today, and that people don't understand what socialism brings, how many times it's been tried, and the devastation that to humanity that has occurred across the globe, that it's a realistic thing that's happening. We have Socialist Party members serving in your House of Representatives in Harrisburg. We have them in D.C. This concerns me greatly. These are some of the opportunities that I think we miss when we don't focus on the real conversations that we need to have. I will tell you the cyber warfare issue that, again, I talked about our great York College here. The day after Soleimani's attack, 10,000 cyber attacks that next day from Iran. We are barraged by this, and our government of freedom and personal individual responsibility makes it difficult. We're not a closed society to guard against these things, but we have to find a way, and we have to get after it against these rogue nations, whether it's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. We have got to get on the ball, and instead we're focused on other things. Healthcare, the price of prescription drugs. The president is doing great things. The Congress is not doing great things. We are focused on other things. I'm working on insulin pricing. As you know, if you know anybody that's diabetic, all of a sudden at one point, it just went up a huge amount where people are making a choice of whether they take their medicine or pay their mortgage or buy their next meal. That is unacceptable, and it's unnecessary. It is unnecessary. We can get after these solutions. I will tell you another thing that concerns me. In Pennsylvania, think about this. We increased our production of fossil fuel, hydraulic fracturing, oil, and natural gas, right? 10 times, tenfold. At the same time, New York put a moratorium on it. Our emissions in Pennsylvania are down more than New York's. who has a moratorium on it while we increased our production 10 times. And I was just at an event on Martin Luther King Day. It was a great event, a day of action, a day of work, where some of the speakers said that fossil fuels are the problem. Humanity is the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, go back to the age before fossil fuels. Watch a documentary on anything that's important to you. I'm rewatching John Adams right now. And think about what the fossil fuel industry has done for the sake of humanity worldwide. Worldwide. I'm not saying we can't get to the hydrogen power unit. We can get there. But we have options, and we don't have to retreat to the forest on the way. Right? I look at some of the things we do. Maryland is now suing Pennsylvania and the EPA for the Chesapeake Bay cleanup. Do you know that there's technology available in nano bubble technology, ozone bubble technology, that can probably fix most of the stuff you're paying all these stormwater fees for that are doing almost absolutely nothing? We can fix this thing. We can harvest carbon dioxide from the air now. We can run there's a power plant in Houston, Texas that takes natural gas. There's no flue gas, right? There's no exhaust. They capture it all and they use it to make more fracking fluid to go get more gas. And more gas equals more innovation and more independence from everything, and probably makes the hydrogen fuel cell possible. We don't have to go back to the 7th century to clean up our act and be good stewards of our environment. And this is the policy that these are the policies, these are the things that we should be discussing in Washington, D.C. that have all taken a back seat. All taken a back seat. I told my colleagues, you can dislike the president all you want. We have elections for that. But we have the work of the people to do. And I'm afraid that unfortunately, as these things loom on us that are right here, present dangers right in front of us, whether it's enemy nations or whether it's the things we want to do ourselves to clean up our world and be good stewards, we're not dealing with it. I mean, we talk about plastics, and I'll shut up and take questions. This is just one that gets me, because my daughter came to me and said, "Daddy, we shouldn't be using plastic straws anymore." I said, "Sweetie, why is that?" "Well, they all end up in the ocean." I said, "Are you familiar with Scott Wagner? Because he gets all our plastic straws." And I guarantee. Did you know that all the ocean-going plastic in the world comes from 90% of it? 90% comes from 10 rivers in the world, and none of those are in the United States. Our foreign policy, we can do a lot to encourage the people that are polluting our oceans to do better. But us not using plastic straws is probably not going to make one heck of a lot of difference, quite honestly. And there are solutions available. So with that, it is my high honor to be in front of the 22nd. Every year I wanted to get closer to number 1, right? And I think it will get there. But it is my high honor and privilege to serve you. Now, I just want to tell you before I take your questions, there will be a race coming up shortly. As you know, the presidential congressional race, not a Senate race in Pennsylvania. This district will be a targeted race across the country, so what you're going to see is a whole lot of outside influence coming in. Neither side here locally will have much to say about it. We can't coordinate by law, so it's just going to happen. We're going to be sitting watching the TV, the messaging, just like you are. Just understand is that the people that you know are the people that you know. The message that you see coming from somewhere across the country might not necessarily be true, but you're going to be barraged with it. I would just encourage you, if you have a question, call the candidate yourself and ask, and just use your own intuition. It's probably more accurate than what you're going to see on the TV. All right, so with that, I'm sure you have no questions, right? You can just shout it out. I'll repeat the question if... Oh, come on. Yes. Yes, sir. Back in the corner.
Scott, thank you for coming.
Hold on, Jimmy, wait for
Scott, thank you for coming and for representing this district. I am also concerned as a taxpayer and a voter that when you use the word service to our country, you and other people who we elect, I no longer see it as service, I see it as a position of power and getting money. I don't know if you're feeling about getting power or making a lot of money, maybe you're not, but that's the view that many of us have toward Congress. We do not see the effect of anything getting done in Congress this particular term, because all of it is centered on this. And you say the bills have been passed. I'm not aware of what has been passed. You are trying to enlighten us, I understand. However, my question is, and I've said this before, when a bill is written, a bill is presented, and it works from the House to the Senate to the President. Most often, there are additional add-ons to bills that are put there to grab someone else's vote. And it's very unnerving to me that things are put into bills that benefit some particular representative or some particular district that shouldn't be in that bill at all. What are you as a congressman doing to avoid that? I mean, also, are you also presenting yourself that you are not exempting yourself as a congressman from the law that is being proposed and passed?
No, I appreciate it. It is a vexing and disappointing circumstance, to be sure, but it is also the way that our system is governed, and especially as a person in the minority, if you don't have, that's called an amendment. So a bill is going, and you get an opportunity to amend it. And of course, sometimes you're right, leadership uses that opportunity to amend it because a member says, well, I won't vote for it until, or unless, and so on and so forth. So what I've done in that regard, I try and keep my stuff germane, and I let my leadership know right up front whether I'm for something or against something on the merits of itself. And you folks probably know this, and some of you might be irritated by it. I mean, I'm an equal opportunity offender in that regard. It doesn't matter whether it's my party or the other party. I will give you a specific example, our national debt, which is something else that concerns me. I know it doesn't seem to concern a lot of people. I understand why it doesn't concern them. But if we're going to bankrupt the country, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, with all these things, and many of them, it's just additional spending, and we don't know if it's meaningful, if it's useful, if it's helpful. I'm not voting to bankrupt the country. I'm not going to do that, and both sides know that, whether we're in charge or whether the other side is in charge. It does concern me. I've seen it going around the internet on occasion that members of Congress get their salary for life, get their health care for life, get all number of perks and so on and so forth. So let me just set the record straight. If you got your salary for life as a member of Congress after a first term, I'm not sure anybody, including myself, would ever serve one, but more than one term. That having been said, we are a federal employee for purposes of pay. There's no special pension. We're not absolved of Social Security payments or what have you. And health care, let's talk about that because it is an issue, and I voted particularly to make sure that the Congress had to abide by the same rules that everybody else does. And that's regarding especially the Affordable Care Act, the ACA. But keep in mind, there is only one federal institution. Think of any federal agency, institution that you know of. There is only one that must abide by the Affordable Care Act. Do you know which one that is? That is the Congress. That is the Congress. Maybe you didn't know that, but, and in my opinion, if the law was what I said it was, which I did say I thought it was unconstitutional, I still do, onerous and actually making prices go up and stifling innovation and so on and so forth, the best way to get that changed is to have members of Congress have to bear the burden that every other citizen does as well. So I think I've tried to live up to my charge there. And oh, by the way, I received my pay, my salary, and absolutely nothing more. My wife and I actually made the choice not to make investments because I didn't want any of you to ever believe that I was making a vote based on my own personal aggrandizement. And so some people say I'm a fool for doing that, but we do believe that this is a service. It's not supposed to be forever. You go, you do your best, and then you move on, and that's the way we're going to treat it. Sir?
You mentioned debt.
Yes.
The United States just closed its first measured decade without an economic recession.
Yet, the debt level exploded. You talk about not passing legislation or not wanting to add legislation that increases or has an expense to it. But is the concept of fiscal conservatism just dead? Is that just no longer in existence? Because I see it on both parties. It just seems the government wants to spend money on different programs depending on who's in power.
Sadly, I wouldn't say it's dead, but there's just not enough people that are willing to take a tough vote or make that an issue. And quite honestly, we don't hear it a lot from our constituents. There are very few people, when I'm knocking on doors, when I'm taking phone calls, people that come to see me or what have you, that talk about their concern with the debt. It concerns me greatly. I don't know what the end point is. At some point, we're going to have to pay the bill back or we're going to have to default. Sadly, the one thing The one thing that I've observed in my time in the legislature, that both Republicans and Democrats and socialists and liberals and independents and conservatives all agree on is spending more of your tax money even if they don't have it. I even lamented to the, I was telling somebody today, to the administration, when the new administration came in and we immediately came to one of these impasses, and I was talking to the chief of staff and I said, I can't believe the president is going to support this. This is irresponsible spending. And he looked at me and he said, well, we sent you a budget, you rejected it out of hand. And he was right. They did send us a budget that cut a whole bunch of that stuff. The Congress didn't even take it up. It becomes partisan, but quite honestly, whether Republicans are in charge and a Republican in the White House or Democrat in the White House or Democrat and Republican in the White House, no matter what the mix is, when the president sends a budget, we almost every single time disregard it, do our own thing. Remember, the spending, the start of the spending occurs in the House of Representatives. But if you're a person, when we did the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, I was one of the guys that said, unless we save a lot of money for the federal government, taking in taxes, it's revenue, right? We're not making money, we're taking your money, right? Unless we're going to stop spending as much, we shouldn't vote for this. And we started, I think, at about 800 billion, and we got whittled down to, I think it was at the end, it was 400 billion or less, and even that was pretty gimmicky. It's never going to happen. So think about it this way, because people will say, well, you voted for the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and that's why the deficit is what it is, right? $1 trillion, over $1 trillion this year, spending more than we're taking in. The federal government is taking in more revenue right now than ever before in history. But we're spending about 7% more than we ever have in history. This is an easy elementary school math addition and subtraction equation. Johnny never catches up if you're going 7 times faster. That's where we are. There's just no appetite for it in Congress because there's no appetite. People don't see the effects of it. They say, well, what does it matter? You keep spending. My life is pretty good. And in a way, I can't blame them. I just don't know when it ends, and it concerns me.
So for my generation, what reforms do you have in mind to protect and keep the promise of health and retirement security, and for your daughters too? So could you?
So it's interesting. I was just talking to one of your colleagues here today. We just voted on recently on the Secure Act, and I voted for it. It was somewhat with reluctance because we want to encourage you to save so that you have something at the end, and the world has changed dramatically from people even in my generations where there were still a lot of pensions available, but now it's really up to the employee or the individual person to secure their retirement, and whether it's a 401k or other investing and so on and so forth. So we want to encourage that. The Secure Act was among other things, there was a lot of interest in it for the banking industry to deal with the CBD and medical marijuana components, because it's still a Schedule I drug, and the banks and the financial institutions were concerned that the federal government would then come and essentially arrest them for dealing with it. So it was essentially a cash business. On the downside of that, because of negotiation, bipartisan negotiation, we actually are discouraging you from saving above a certain level for a long period of time and forcing you to take it out earlier. What I do, sir, is make my arguments in that regard, that we should be encouraging it. Becomes a class struggle. It should not be that. We want every single American, young, old, man, woman, no matter what your race is, whatever, we don't care. We want every single American to be able to do well. But unfortunately, a lot of the rhetoric, and I think you know what I'm talking about, makes you a mean person, an uncaring person, if you don't do it a certain way, even though the facts belie, that reality. And but you have a choice, right? You'll see that I don't vote present. I vote yes or no, and so I look at it on balance. Is this better than what we had now? The bill is not perfect. The bill was not perfect. But it also creates a lot of opportunities, not only for our country, but for our state as well. And so you look at it on balance of a problem that needs to be fixed, and you got to compromise. So that's kind of where I am on it. Back in court.
If abuse of Congress or abuse of power and obstruction of Congress are not impeachable offenses, what are?
The question is probably in the eye of the beholder. So abuse of Congress comes from the opinion that the president said, you can't come, we're not going to provide the documents. I don't know over the course of history how many times the Congress has asked the executive branch, regardless of the party, for either a witness to testify or for documents. I mean, I can name some, but it's a continual struggle as was set up by the framers. What I do find objectionable is that it's abuse of Congress if you, this is the way I kind of characterize this, it's an abuse of Congress if you avail yourself as the president, if you're the president, and you avail yourself to your constitutional rights. So there are reasons, there are legitimate reasons, and we call it executive privilege. Now that maybe has a bad ring to it, but executive privilege is essentially this. If you're working for the president, or if you're at the executive branch having a conversation with a foreign dignitary, a foreign leader, that is privileged conversation, and the reason it's privileged is because we need you to be candid, whether you're the chief of staff, the secretary of state, or a foreign president. If those conversations are always going to be sunlighted, always going to be daylighted to the public on every occasion, there's going to be a reluctance for the advisors of the president and certainly from foreign leaders to have a candid conversation that those things need to happen. And so in that context, the White House is claiming executive privilege. Now, it's not always germane, and we get that. Sometimes the White House, I think there's too much held secret by the agencies and by the administration, so on and so forth. Even in a Republican administration, the administration's a Republican. I can't get information that I want, and I think it should be available. I think it should. I think we overclassify and so on and so forth. I agree with that. When you have that difference of opinion, the remedy is to take it to the courts. It's supposed to be an impartial arbiter to say, are you just trying to stonewall, or is there a legitimate concern to this privilege? The issue is, on this occasion, is that it was never taken to the courts. We were told that this has to happen immediately. It has to happen right now. We're going to move forward without getting this information, and we're going to charge, we're going to allege that these wrongdoings were done without the information because it's so grave. And then immediately following that, it's so grave that we held it up for about 30 days. Right, trying to influence how the Senate was going to conduct their business. The Senate's not going to be influenced by how the House wants it to conduct its business. I would just tell you, I've tried many, many times, right? They do their own thing over there, and for better or worse, that having been said. But that's essentially the argument, and so I think it's a hollow argument from the standpoint that over time immemorial, as long as this government's been set up, there have been differences of opinion between the legislative and executive branch, and the remedy, time and time again, has been to go to the courts, and each side takes their lumps. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. If there's a legitimate claim to privilege, then so be it. But you can't say that we asked, the person didn't come, or the documents didn't come, and now we gave it up, and now we're going to make the Senate do it. That's not how this operation is supposed to work. If it was so darn important and so critical to the case, and mind you, the accusation's been made without that information. Just put yourself in this position. You have no opportunity to defend yourself, and you're being accused. You have no opportunity to defend yourself, and when you do defend yourself lawfully, using the court, using the privileges that are granted to you as the accused, and remember, we side on the side of the accused, right? You are innocent until proven guilty. But by availing of yourself to your constitutionally guaranteed rights, you're now obstructing. I think that's a really, really dangerous place to be, regardless of how you feel about this president or any other president. I would defend. Look, I will just tell you, I served as a member of Congress when President Obama was the president, and daily I had calls and beseeches to introduce the articles of impeachment. And I just said, that's absolutely inappropriate. I disagree with some of the policy. That's why we have elections, high crimes and misdemeanors. We don't want to cheapen that because we are going to get nothing done for the foreseeable future if this is the way we're going to go when we have a disagreement as a legislative branch with a president. We're always going to have a disagreement. Always going to have a disagreement. There's a way to remedy that stuff, and it's through elections.
Well, the shortcoming in your argument, I believe, is to the extent that Congress issues an impeachment order, I think you're operating under a different set of rules. And that means that the privileges that the president is asking for are not legitimate at this point. Without that, there is no check on the presidential power.
Well, like I said, they might be illegitimate. You might be right about that. But I know you think you are, sir. However, the president and the administration doesn't feel that way, and so the arbiter is the courts, but the courts have not been given the
No, sir,
opportunity.
the arbiter is going to be the Senate, not the courts.
Well, the arbiter in this case, because it's gone, but it's not for the Senate. If you look at history, if you look at precedent, and by the way, the Senate tried to impeach Johnson for a law that was unconstitutional, where they said he couldn't remove his own cabinet members, and he did break the law. He removed his own cabinet member, but the law was unconstitutional. But the point is that that's not the Senate's job to do that. They did the investigation in the House, and they're supposed to present the information, the evidence of the crime in the Senate, and the Senate is supposed to judge and vote based on that judgment. Now they're asking the Senate to continue the investigation. That has never been done, and I don't see it as appropriate either, because you can, if that's the case, you as the accused can never be free of whatever you're accused of, whether you're innocent or not. We're out of time. Listen, I'll stick around. Anybody want to? I got to be careful how I say. Oh, one last thing before I go. If you saw me on Fox 43 this morning, and I didn't pick the 49ers or Kansas City, just know that members of Congress are prohibited from endorsing business enterprises. So, we're trying to always do the right thing, but just to let you know. So, God bless you. Thank you. You've been a wonderful